A joyful family eagerly awaits the birth of their baby girl, but when an unimaginable tragedy strikes, a single moment changes everything in a way no one could have predicted. Before we start, don't forget to subscribe for more stories. A soft golden glow filtered through the lace curtains of the Galli family's modest home in Verona, Italy. The spring sun bathed the living room with warmth, highlighting the simple yet cozy surroundings. The air was filled with the gentle hum of music from the small radio on the kitchen counter, a soft Italian ballad playing in the background. Lorenzo Galli hummed along as he crouched by a wooden crib, tightening the last bolt. He leaned back and wiped his brow, eyes fixed on his handiwork. The pastel yellow walls of the nursery were adorned with delicate floral decals, and above the crib hung a handmade mobile of paper doves, gently spinning with the faintest breeze. "Perfect," he muttered to himself, his lips curling into a proud smile. He glanced at the open doorway where his wife Emilia stood with a hand on her round belly and their 4-year-old son Elias, clinging to her leg like a curious little koala. "Papa, is that for the baby?" Elias asked, tilting his head like a curious bird. His big blue eyes sparkled with wonder, and his curls bounced with every small movement. "Yes, little man," Lorenzo replied, standing up and dusting his jeans. "This is where your little sister will sleep. Do you think she'll like it?" He scooped Elias up into his arms, lifting him high with ease. "She will, Papa." Elias giggled, reaching toward the mobile and giving one of the paper doves a gentle push. It spun slowly, the delicate shadow of wings dancing on the yellow walls. Emilia walked over, her gaze warm but tired. She placed her hand on Lorenzo's cheek, her touch soft as silk. "You've outdone yourself, amore. It's beautiful." "Only the best for my girls," Lorenzo replied, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "And for you too, Elias," he added, booping his son's nose. The boy giggled again, burying his face into his father's neck. For a moment, everything felt whole, complete. Their little family, soon to be 4, was on the edge of a new beginning. The room smelled faintly of fresh paint, lavender oil, and something distinctly homey, love perhaps. That evening, they gathered around the dining table for a small celebration. The table, though simple, was full of life. Plates of tortellini, garlic bread, and fresh tomato salad filled the air with the comforting aroma of home-cooked food. Emilia's younger sister, Beatrice, was already at the table, slicing pieces of tiramisu with surgical precision. "Beatrice, you're cutting it too small," Lorenzo teased, tossing a kitchen towel over his shoulder. "This is a celebration, not rationing." "Everyone's on a diet until the baby arrives, Lorenzo," Beatrice quipped, winking at Emilia. "You'll thank me later." "Not if I starve first," Lorenzo retorted, causing Elias to burst into laughter so hard he nearly spilled his juice. Emilia smiled, a soft, gentle smile filled with gratitude. This was the kind of love she had dreamed of for her children, a family that filled every corner of the house with laughter and warmth. As they sat to eat, Lorenzo poured Emilia a glass of sparkling water, mindful of her pregnancy. He raised his glass, clearing his throat for a toast. "To new beginnings," he declared, his eyes fixed on Emilia. "To our growing family. And to the little miracle that's coming our way. To Evelina," Beatrice added, raising her glass. "To Evelina." They all echoed, their voices mingling with the clinking of glasses. Emilia lowered her gaze, her eyes brimming with tears of quiet joy. She brushed her hand over her belly, feeling the soft, reassuring kicks of her baby girl. "She already knows she's loved," she whispered to herself. Later that night, with Elias fast asleep in his room, Lorenzo and Emilia lay in bed together. The air was still, and only the distant hum of Verona's nightlife buzzed faintly in the background. The soft glow of the bedside lamp illuminated Emilia's face as she lay on her side, her head resting on Lorenzo's chest. He ran his fingers gently through her hair, his breath calm and steady. "Do you think we'll be ready for her?" she asked, her voice quiet but clear. Her fingers traced the line of his collarbone absent-mindedly, a habit she'd picked up during their first years of marriage. "We've been ready since the day we dreamed of her," he replied without hesitation, kissing the top of her head. "We've faced everything together, Emilia. We'll face this too." Her eyes lingered on his face for a moment, taking in every feature, the stubble on his jaw, the faint wrinkle between his brows, the calm but resolute way he gazed at her. She trusted him with everything she had. "You're right," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I just want everything to be perfect. For her. For us." "It will be," Lorenzo assured her, rubbing slow, comforting circles on her back. "Maybe not perfect like in the movies, but perfect for us." Emilia chuckled softly and a tear escaped down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. I love you, Lorenzo. I love you more, he replied, pulling her closer. Their breaths fell into rhythm, their hearts beating steadily in sync. But as they drifted into sleep, neither of them knew how deeply those words would be tested in the coming days. A week later, Emilia woke to the familiar tightness in her abdomen. It wasn't a sharp pain but a deep, rolling sensation that came and went like the tide. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake Lorenzo, but he stirred the moment she moved. Emmy? He asked groggily, eyes half closed. You all right? I think, she winced, placing a hand on her belly. I think she's ready. Lorenzo sat up in an instant, fully alert. Now? He asked, rubbing his eyes before bolting out of bed. All right, okay, no problem. I'll get the bag. He hurried around the room, throwing on a jacket and grabbing the packed hospital bag. Emilia watched him from the bed, smiling despite the ache. Lorenzo, she said softly. He paused, turning to her with wide eyes. Yes? Did I forget something? Is it your sweater? Your phone? He asked, breathless with urgency. Just breathe, she said, reaching out for his hand. He stepped over, taking it carefully, his heart still racing. We've got time. We'll do this together. He crouched down, their eyes level. Her gaze was calm but strong, like the eye of a storm. He nodded, his breath slowing to match hers. Together, he whispered, pressing his forehead against hers. The world outside seemed so far away as they remained like that, connected in their shared resolve. It wasn't fear that filled them, it was love. Raw, fierce, and unbreakable love. Moments later, they quietly crept into Elias's room, where the boy lay sprawled on his bed, his stuffed bear tucked under his arm. Lorenzo kissed his son's head, brushing back his curls. Sleep tight, champ, he whispered. Be strong for your sister, Emilia added, running her hand lightly across Elias's back. They lingered for just a moment before stepping away. Outside, the air was crisp, and the distant bell of a clock tower echoed through the night. Lorenzo started the car, his hands firm but steady on the wheel. Emilia leaned back, exhaling deeply as another wave of contractions rolled through her. Her fingers gripped his free hand. Ready? He asked, glancing at her. More than ever, she replied, letting out a slow breath. And with that, they drove toward St. Gabriel's Hospital, hearts full of love, hope, and a quiet belief that everything would be okay. But fate had other plans. The dim glow of the streetlights flickered over the rain-slicked roads as Lorenzo's car sped through the quiet streets of Verona. The soft hum of the engine was punctuated by the rhythmic breaths of Emilia, her hands braced on the dashboard, her eyes closed in concentration. Every few minutes, she let out a long, slow breath, her brow furrowed but her resolve unwavering. How are we doing, amore? Lorenzo asked, his voice tight with both focus and concern. He glanced at her, trying to gauge her condition. Still alive, she muttered, her eyes flickering open to give him a playful grin. I've handled Elias's tantrums, haven't I? This is nothing. Lorenzo chuckled despite the weight of the moment. Her humor had always been a guiding light for him in times of stress. But as another contraction gripped her, he gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. We're almost there, Emilia. I promise. St. Gabriel's Hospital came into view just as a light drizzle began to fall, dotting the windshield with tiny droplets. The glow of the hospital's neon sign flickered like a lighthouse calling them to shore. Lorenzo pulled into the emergency entrance, his heart racing as he rushed out of the car. He rounded the front, opening the passenger door and offering Emilia his hand. Easy, take it slow, he said, trying to sound calm, but the quiver in his voice betrayed him. Slow? She huffed, gripping his hand. I'd love to see you do this slowly. They both laughed, a sound that somehow steadied them both. Emilia gritted her teeth and took a deep breath as another contraction hit. Lorenzo's heart pounded in his chest, but he held her firmly, guiding her toward the entrance. Nurse Jacob, a tall man with soft eyes and a steady presence, was already waiting for them with a wheelchair. His reassuring smile was a balm to Lorenzo's nerves. Welcome, Mrs. Golly. Looks like you're ready for a big day, Nurse Jacob said, helping Emilia into the chair. He glanced at Lorenzo with a nod. Don't worry, she's in good hands. Lorenzo released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Grazie, Jacob, he said, his voice hoarse. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fresh linen, with the gentle murmur of machines beeping in the background. Nurse Jacob rolled Emilia down the hallway toward the maternity ward, where the bright, sterile lights cast everything in sharp relief. Lorenzo walked alongside, his eyes darting from one nurse to the next, searching for signs of urgency or concern. At the nurse's station, Dr. Claudia Moretti, a woman in her late 40s with a commanding yet kind demeanor, approached with a clipboard in hand. Her long auburn hair was tied into a tidy bun, and she wore an expression of calm authority. "Mrs. Gali," she greeted warmly. "I hear we've got a little one eager to meet us today." Amelia smiled through another contraction. "Eager is one way to put it, doctor." "Well, let's see how far along you are," Dr. Moretti replied, nodding to Nurse Jacob. They wheeled Amelia into a birthing suite, where the pale blue walls and soft lighting created a sense of tranquility. Once Amelia was settled on the bed, Dr. Moretti performed a quick examination. She removed her gloves and smiled. "You're doing great, Amelia. You're about 5 centimeters dilated. It's going to be a few hours, but everything looks normal." Amelia sighed in relief, her body finally able to relax for a moment. "Normal sounds good," she said, resting her head on the pillow. "Normal is exactly what we want," Dr. Moretti replied, patting Amelia on the arm before turning to Lorenzo. "She's in excellent shape. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call the nurse's station." "Thank you, doctor," Lorenzo said, his relief palpable. He kissed Amelia's forehead, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You hear that? Everything's normal. Just a few more hours and we'll have our little Evelina in our arms." Amelia nodded, her eyes half closed, exhaustion beginning to weigh on her. But her hand never left Lorenzo's. 2 hours passed. The room remained quiet except for the soft beeping of the heart monitor and the slow, rhythmic breathing of Amelia. Lorenzo sat in a chair beside her, his phone buzzing every few minutes with messages from family. "Beatrice, any updates? Is she here yet?" Lorenzo typed back, "Not yet. Amelia is doing great. Evelina's taking her time." His mother, Sophia, had sent a similar message, asking if she and Lorenzo's father, Matteo, should come to the hospital. Lorenzo reassured her there was no need yet. "We'll call when it's time," he'd said, his eyes flicking over to Amelia's face as she dozed lightly. As he sat back in the chair, a warmth spread through his chest. He could see it all so clearly, the 4 of them together at home, Evelina wrapped in a soft pink blanket, Elias peeking over the side of the crib with his curious eyes. It was so close, so real, he could almost hear the sound of tiny giggles filling the house. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the image play in his mind like a scene from a dream. "Papa?" Elias's small voice echoed in his memory. "I'm here, champ," Lorenzo whispered to himself, his heart so full it ached. But then something changed. A sharp, strained gasp came from the bed. Lorenzo's eyes snapped open. Amelia's fingers clutched at the bedsheet, her breathing uneven and shallow. Her face was pale, far too pale. "Amelia," he said, shooting to his feet. "Amelia, what is it?" Her eyes opened slowly, her pupils dilated. She tried to speak, but only a faint gasp came out. "Help. Help, please." Lorenzo's voice was raw with panic as he bolted for the call button. The moment he pressed it, Nurse Jacob burst into the room like he'd been waiting for it. "What's going on?" Jacob asked, already moving toward Amelia. "She can't breathe," Lorenzo cried, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack his ribs. Jacob moved with precision, his voice steady but firm. "Amelia, stay with me. I'm going to check your oxygen levels." He clipped a pulse oximeter to her finger and glanced at the screen. His face remained calm, but Lorenzo could see his eyes narrow in concern. "Dr. Moretti, code red in birthing suite 3, Jacob said into his radio. The words made Lorenzo's blood run cold. "Code red?" he asked, his voice cracking. "What does that mean? What's happening?" "Please step outside, Mr. Gali," Jacob said firmly but not unkindly. "We're going to take care of her, I promise." "No, I'm not leaving her," Lorenzo insisted, his voice rising. He felt a hand on his chest, Nurse Jacob gently but firmly guiding him toward the door. "Stay calm for her," Jacob said, his eyes locking with Lorenzo's. "She needs you to stay calm." Lorenzo's breath hitched as he stumbled back, his hands trembling. The doors to the suite swung open as Dr. Moretti and 2 more nurses rushed in, their faces set with urgency. "Her vitals are dropping," Jacob reported, checking the heart monitor. "Oxygen saturation at 84%. "Start oxygen," Dr. Moretti ordered. Her gaze darted to Amelia, and for a split second, her eyes filled with something Lorenzo wasn't ready to see. "Worry. What's happening? Please tell me what's happening," Lorenzo shouted from the doorway. Dr. Moretti glanced over her shoulder, her face grave but composed. "She's experiencing an embolism, Mr. Gali. We need to act fast. An embolism? The word felt foreign and cruel. No, 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 she was fine. She was just fine. Sometimes it happens suddenly, Dr. Moretti said. We'll do everything we can. The last thing Lorenzo saw before the doors closed was Emilia's still face and the flurry of movement around her. He pressed his hands to the glass window, eyes wild with helplessness. Emilia, he choked, his breath fogging the glass. Behind him, the sterile hallway stretched into eternity, but all he could see was the woman he loved fighting for her life. The sterile brightness of the hospital hallway felt colder than before. Lorenzo paced back and forth like a man trapped in a cage, his eyes locked on the observation window. His heart pounded like a drum in his chest, and every beat echoed in his ears. He pressed his hands against the glass, his breath fogging it with shallow gasps. Inside the birthing suite, the scene was a flurry of movement. Dr. Claudia Moretti stood at Emilia's bedside, her voice sharp and commanding. Heart rate's dropping. Oxygen saturation is at 78%. We need to stabilize her now. Nurse Jacob adjusted the oxygen mask on Emilia's face, his usually calm demeanor now laced with urgency. Two other nurses moved with practiced precision, one checking the foreline while the other prepared emergency medications. Lorenzo's eyes flicked between them, desperately trying to make sense of it all. She was fine just minutes ago. She was cracking jokes, smiling, talking about Evelina. His hands pressed harder against the window, as though he could break through and pull her back to safety. Please, someone tell me what's happening, he muttered, his voice cracking. His throat felt raw, his breath shallow and quick. The door to the hallway opened and Nurse Jacob stepped out. Lorenzo rushed toward him, gripping him by the arm. What's happening to her? Lorenzo's voice was wild with panic, his eyes wide with terror. Please tell me she's okay. Tell me she's going to be okay. Jacob placed a firm hand on Lorenzo's shoulder, his gaze steady but grim. She's having complications, Lorenzo. It's called an amniotic fluid embolism. What does that even mean? Lorenzo demanded, his fingers tightening on Jacob's arm. She was fine. She was fine 5 minutes ago. I know, Jacob said gently, his voice controlled but serious. Sometimes it happens without warning. It's extremely rare, but it's serious. Her body is having an extreme reaction to the amniotic fluid entering her bloodstream. He glanced back through the window as Dr. Moretti barked another command. Right now, we need to stabilize her heart and lungs. Lorenzo felt as though the ground had dropped out from under him. His knees buckled and he had to lean against the wall to stay upright. His mind tried to process Jacob's words, but they felt distant, foreign, like a language he had never learned. Stabilize? He repeated, his breath shallow. What does that even mean? Is she going to? She's fighting, Lorenzo, Jacob said firmly, his eyes locked on his. But she's strong. You know that. A loud alarm blared from inside the suite, and both of them turned to see one of the nurses rushing to grab the crash cart. Lorenzo's heart dropped into his stomach. Her heart just stopped, Jacob said quietly. Without another word, he rushed back inside. Lorenzo pressed his forehead against the cold glass, watching helplessly as the medical team sprang into action. His breath came in short, rapid bursts, fogging up the glass. Through the blur, he could still make out Emilia's face, her head tilted to the side, her eyes closed, her face unnervingly still. No, 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 please no, Lorenzo muttered, his hands curling into fists. He slammed his palm against the glass. Claudia, do something. Please. Dr. Moretti's eyes were locked on Emilia's vital signs. Her jaw was tight with focus. Starting chest compressions, she announced. Her hands pressed down on Emilia's chest, each push rhythmic and forceful. 1, 2, 3, 4. The steady beat of compressions echoed in Lorenzo's ears, every count driving a nail deeper into his chest. He covered his mouth with his hand, feeling like he might vomit. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be safe. They were supposed to meet their daughter together. Another nurse charged the defibrillator, her hands steady but fast. Charging to 200 joules, she called out. Clear. Dr. Moretti shouted. Lorenzo saw Emilia's body jolt from the electric shock, her back arching before slumping back onto the bed. The image was seared into his mind, so visceral and raw that he had to close his eyes to block it out. Check for a pulse, Dr. Moretti ordered. The nurse pressed her fingers against Emilia's neck, her eyes on the clock. Lorenzo held his breath, his eyes squeezed shut, praying, begging, pleading. Nothing, the nurse said, her voice steady but grim. Shock again, Dr. Moretti said, her voice hard as steel. Charge to 300 joules. Clear. Another shock. Emilia's body jerked again and Lorenzo's knees hit the ground. His hands clasped together as if in prayer. Please God. Please God. Not her. Not her. Take me instead, but not her. Not her. His words came out in broken sobs. For a moment, everything went still. No sound, no movement. Just silence. Then it came, a single faint beep. Then another. Heartbeat detected, Jacob called out, his eyes flicking to the heart monitor. She's back. Pulse is faint but steady, the nurse confirmed, relief in her voice. Lorenzo lifted his head, eyes blurred with tears. She's alive? He whispered, his lips trembling. He pressed himself up from the floor, his hands still shaky. She's alive? For now, Jacob said, turning back to him through the glass. We've got her heart going again, but she's not out of danger. We need to get her on ECMO immediately. ECMO? Lorenzo asked, his mind trying to cling to the unfamiliar term. It's a machine that takes over the function of her heart and lungs, Jacob explained quickly as he moved toward the door. It gives her body a chance to rest while we treat the embolism. Lorenzo nodded, though he didn't fully understand. None of it mattered, not the names of the machines or the procedures. All he knew was that Emilia was still alive. She was still here. Moments later, the hospital doors swung open and a rolling cart was brought in. It looked like something from a sci-fi movie, all metal tubes and thick, clear lines that fed into a central pump. Lorenzo's chest tightened as they hooked Emilia up to it. Lorenzo, Jacob called from inside the room, his voice firm but gentle. Go to the waiting room. I promise I'll keep you updated. Lorenzo opened his mouth to argue, but he knew he couldn't do anything to help. Staying here would only make it harder for them to do their job. His breath hitched as he glanced at Emilia one last time. Her face was still so pale, her body now connected to machines that breathed and pumped for her. I love you, he whispered, his hand pressed against the glass. Please don't leave me. Jacob's gaze softened. She's strong, Lorenzo. Don't forget that. His legs felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds as he forced himself to step away. The hallway felt too bright, too empty, like he had been cast out of the world he knew. The sound of the crash cart's wheels echoed down the corridor behind him, but he didn't turn around. He reached the waiting room and sat on a stiff chair, his hands trembling. He rubbed them together, trying to find warmth, trying to feel something other than this suffocating numbness. His eyes stayed on the door, willing it to open with good news. His mind flashed with memories, Emilia laughing as she taught Elias to make paper airplanes, her eyes full of life as she talked about their future. He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling as he sent a message to Beatrice. Pray for Emilia. It's bad. No response. The minutes dragged. Lorenzo hunched over, his head in his hands, unable to block out the image of Emilia's body jolting from the defibrillator's shock. His heart ached in a way he'd never felt before. This was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. Instead, it had become a nightmare. The glow of the overhead surgical lights bathed the operating room in a harsh white glare. The steady hum of machines filled the air, accompanied by the rapid, urgent voices of medical professionals. Every second mattered. Every breath, every pulse, every movement felt like it was on the edge of disaster. Dr. Claudia Moretti stood at the center of it all, her eyes sharp as steel. Her gloves were stained with blood, her hands moving with precision as she directed the team. We're losing her, she said, her voice steady but firm. Start compressions again. We need that heart pumping. One of the nurses, her brow glistening with sweat, stepped forward and began CPR on Emilia's motionless body. Each push into her chest was firm, deliberate, and measured. Lorenzo's heart would have shattered if he had seen it, but he wasn't allowed inside. Blood pressure is dropping fast, Nurse Jacob called out, glancing at the vitals on the monitor. BP is 60/40ths, 50/30, 40/20ths. Come on, Dr. Moretti muttered to herself. Her fingers moved quickly, adjusting the position of the breathing tube while another nurse worked on the intravenous line. Prepare a dose of epinephrine. I want it in her now. The nurse nodded, rushing to prepare the syringe. Dr. Moretti glanced at the heart monitor, her jaw tightening. There was a single, sharp tone. A line stretched flat across the screen. Cardiac arrest, Jacob called, his voice tense but controlled. Damn it, Dr. Moretti hissed. Charge the defibrillator to 200. Charging, replied another nurse. Clear. The jolt made Emilia's body lift from the operating table, her back arching before falling still once more. Everyone's eyes snapped to the monitor. Still flat. No rhythm. No pulse. Charge to 300, Dr. Moretti ordered, her eyes narrowing. Charging. Clear. Another shock. Another jolt. The silence that followed was deafening. They all watched, breath held, until a faint beep echoed through the room. Then another. We've got a pulse, Jacob confirmed, relief washing over his face. All right, Dr. Moretti said, regaining control. Let's not lose it. Nurse, stabilize her with vasopressors. We need to maintain blood pressure. Her eyes darted toward the fetal monitor. The baby's heart rate was slow but still there. Dr. Moretti made a decision. We can't wait any longer. We're doing the C-section now. Scalpel. The nurse handed her the instrument, and Dr. Moretti's hands moved with calm precision. She was used to emergencies, but this was different. She knew there were 2 lives on the line, and no guarantees for either. Keep the oxygen steady, she said, her voice as sharp as the blade she wielded. I want eyes on both heart rates at all times. No one takes their eyes off those monitors. Her hand moved swiftly, her every movement precise. Blood welled from the incision, but she didn't flinch. She worked methodically, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. I see her, she announced, her voice louder, filled with determination. Get ready for the catch. Jacob stepped forward, his hands ready, his eyes sharp. Outside the operating room, Lorenzo sat slumped in a chair, his elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. He had never felt so helpless. His whole life he had been able to fix things. A broken chair, a leaking faucet, even Elias's scraped knee. But this? He had no tools. No way to help. His leg bounced with nervous energy as he glanced at the clock on the wall. Every tick was a reminder of how long he'd been waiting. He stared at the double doors ahead, eyes locked on the small window at the top. It was foggy from condensation, blurring the view of what was happening inside. His phone vibrated in his pocket, but he didn't reach for it. It didn't matter. Nothing outside of this hallway mattered. A voice startled him. Are you all right, my son? Lorenzo turned to see an older man in a simple black suit, a white clerical collar peeking from beneath his coat. His face was lined with age and wisdom, his eyes soft but knowing. I don't know, Lorenzo admitted, his voice hollow. His fingers raked through his hair, tugging at it as if the pain might ground him. They're in there, both of them. My wife and my baby. His voice cracked and he bit his lip to stop the sob from escaping. I can't lose them. The priest sat beside him, hands folded calmly in his lap. Have you prayed? He asked softly. Lorenzo blinked at him, his breath uneven. I don't know how to pray right now. I don't even know what to say. Then don't say anything, the priest replied gently. Sometimes all you need to do is sit in the silence. Let the heart do the talking. Lorenzo lowered his head, his chest heaving with silent sobs. The priest remained by his side, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm of fear and uncertainty. Inside the operating room, Dr. Moretti let out a breath as she pulled the baby free. The child was still, her tiny body slick with fluid. For one terrifying second there was silence. Come on, little one, Jacob whispered, cradling the baby in his gloved hands. He rubbed her back, his movements firm but gentle. Come on, give us something. Nothing. The air felt like it had stopped. Jacob tilted the baby's head slightly, clearing her airway. He sucked away the fluid with a suction device and rubbed her back again. Breathe, Piccola, breathe. Then it came. A cry. Tiny but strong. Everyone in the room froze for a moment before they collectively exhaled, their muscles unwinding all at once. The baby's small cries grew louder, and Jacob's eyes crinkled with a relieved smile. Strong lungs, he said, holding her up for Dr. Moretti to see. Dr. Moretti sighed deeply, wiping her forehead with the back of her arm. She's beautiful, she murmured before turning back to Amelia. All right, let's focus on the mother. We're not done yet. Nurse Jacob wrapped the baby in a warm cloth and carried her to the side of the room, where he performed a quick assessment. Breathing steady. No signs of distress, he confirmed. This little one is a fighter. Like her mother, Dr. Moretti added, her eyes locked on Amelia's face, which remained still, pale and frighteningly quiet. Lorenzo was still sitting in silence when he heard it, faint, distant, but undeniable. A cry. A baby's cry. His head shot up, his eyes darting toward the double doors. The foggy window revealed nothing, but he knew. He knew. He stumbled to his feet, his hands pressed flat against the door as if he could push through it. Is that her? He gasped, eyes wild, his heart racing. Is that my baby? The priest stood slowly, his face lighting with a gentle smile. Yes, my son. I believe it is. Tears rolled down Lorenzo's face, but this time they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of hope, of joy. He pressed his forehead against the door, his lips whispering words of gratitude he didn't even realize he knew. But his heart remained heavy. His baby had arrived. His daughter was here. But where was Amelia? The joy that had filled his chest slowly dimmed, replaced by the icy grip of fear. He stared at the door, unblinking, waiting, hoping, praying for a sign. Any sign. Please God, he whispered, his voice breaking. Don't let her go. Please. He stayed there, pressed against the door, his hands flat, his forehead leaning against it as if he could somehow push himself closer to her. His tears stained the door as he whispered over and over again, Please God, bring her back to me. And so he waited, and he prayed. The hallway was still. Too still. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, the only sound in a space that felt frozen in time. Lorenzo leaned against the cold, white-tiled wall, his eyes fixed on the double doors ahead. Every nerve in his body was pulled taut like a string about to snap. His fingers tapped a restless rhythm against his thigh. Every breath he took felt shallow, as if his lungs refused to fully expand. Come on, he muttered under his breath, his eyes unblinking. Come on, someone, please. The stillness of the corridor only made it worse. Minutes felt like hours. Every moment that passed without news clawed at his mind. His heart ached with an unbearable pressure, part hope, part dread. His foot bounced restlessly on the tile floor as he glanced up at the clock on the wall. He didn't know how long it had been. Time had no meaning anymore. The doors finally swung open. Lorenzo straightened so fast he nearly lost his balance. His eyes darted toward the figure walking through the door. It was Nurse Jacob, his face still masked, his cap slightly askew. His eyes, however, were clear. They locked onto Lorenzo's immediately. Lorenzo's breath caught in his chest. His feet didn't move at first, as if his body wasn't ready to face whatever Jacob was about to say. But then he surged forward. Jacob. Lorenzo's voice was hoarse, every ounce of desperation pouring into that one name. His eyes darted between Jacob's face and his hands, searching for any sign. Is she? Are they? Jacob took a step closer, his face softening as he pulled down his mask. His eyes shone with something unmistakable. Relief. Your daughter, Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion, is alive and well. Lorenzo's knees buckled, but he caught himself on the wall. His hands shot up to his face, pressing against his mouth as a sob escaped him. He leaned forward, his whole body trembling. He squeezed his eyes shut, letting the tears flow freely. A laugh escaped between his sobs, wild and breathless. She's alive? He choked, his voice breaking with disbelief. His eyes opened, wide and glassy, and he searched Jacob's face, needing to hear it again. She's okay? Jacob nodded, his lips curving into a smile. She's more than okay, Lorenzo. She's strong. She's perfect. Lorenzo covered his face with both hands, unable to stop the flood of emotions. His chest heaved, his breath shallow and uneven. Relief, joy, exhaustion, it all hit him at once. Can I see her? He asked, his voice muffled behind his hands. Come with me, Jacob replied, his tone gentle but certain. Lorenzo followed him through the double doors, his heart thudding in his chest. Every step felt surreal, like walking through a dream. The world around him moved in slow motion. The bright lights of the operating area didn't feel as harsh anymore. The sound of distant beeping monitors didn't send him into a panic. He could only focus on one thing, seeing his baby. As they rounded the corner, Jacob led him into a small room where one of the nurses stood beside a clear crib. Wrapped snugly in a soft, white blanket was a tiny, wrinkled baby. Her skin was red and new, her eyes squeezed tightly shut, and her fists balled up like she was ready to take on the world. Lorenzo stopped in his tracks. His breath left him, stolen by the sight of her. Is that her? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. That's her, Jacob replied with a grin. Meet your daughter, Lorenzo. The nurse nodded and gently lifted the baby from the crib. She approached him slowly, cradling the baby close. Here she is, Papa. Ready to meet you. Lorenzo's hands shook as he reached out. His fingers hovered just above the baby's head, unsure of how to touch something so fragile. The nurse tilted the baby toward him and instinct took over. He cradled her carefully in his arms, his breath shallow, his eyes never leaving her face. Hi, he whispered, his voice trembling as he looked at her. His eyes filled with tears once more. He brushed his thumb gently across her cheek, marveling at how soft she was. Hi, Piccola. It's me. I'm your papa. Her face scrunched up, lips puckering like she was about to cry, but she didn't. Her tiny body shifted and she let out a soft, tiny sound, a hiccup. Lorenzo gasped, his eyes filling with awe. "You're so strong, aren't you?" he whispered, his smile shaky but wide. His voice cracked as he spoke, overcome by the sheer magnitude of love he felt. "Just like your mama." He bent his head, pressing a kiss against her soft forehead. The warmth of her skin against his lips nearly broke him. Tears spilled down his face, but this time, they were tears of gratitude, of love that had no bounds. "Evelina," he murmured, testing her name on his tongue. "You are everything I dreamed of, little one." The nurse stepped back, giving him space to savor the moment. Lorenzo rocked back and forth slowly, his body moving on instinct as he held his daughter close. Her tiny breaths were warm against his chest, her body so small, so fragile, but so full of life. "Your mother is going to love you so much," he whispered, his lips close to her ear. "She's going to be the best mama. And you're going to be her whole world." The warmth in his chest suddenly turned cold. His heart dropped as the weight of reality came rushing back. His smile faltered, and he glanced toward the doorway, his eyes scanning for any sign of Dr. Moretti or the nurses. "Jacob," he said slowly, his voice thick with the shift in his emotions. "What about Emilia?" Jacob's smile faded. His face turned serious, and for a moment he hesitated. Lorenzo saw it, the flicker of uncertainty. The thing no one wanted to say. "She's still in surgery," Jacob admitted, his voice soft but direct. "They're doing everything they can." Lorenzo's breath hitched. He looked down at Evelina, her face calm and still in his arms. His lips trembled and he pressed his forehead against hers, his eyes squeezed shut. "You hear that, Piccola?" he whispered, his tears falling onto her soft blanket. "Your mama's fighting for you. She's fighting so hard." He let out a breath that was part sob, part prayer. His whole body felt heavy, like he was being pulled to the ground by the weight of it all. He cradled Evelina tighter, his arms wrapping around her like he could shield her from the world. "You'll meet her soon," he whispered to his daughter, rocking her gently. "I promise you, Piccola. You'll meet her soon." But deep down, a seed of doubt had taken root. The what-if clawed at him, refusing to let go. He closed his eyes, holding his daughter close, and prayed harder than he'd ever prayed in his life. "Please," he whispered to whatever force was listening. "Please don't take her from us." He swayed back and forth, as his daughter's tiny breaths rose and fell against his chest. She was so small, so new, but she felt like his whole world now. "Don't worry, Piccola," he murmured, his lips brushing against her temple. "Your mama is strong. She'll be here soon." His voice shook with the weight of his own doubt. He kissed her again. And he waited. The soft hum of the ventilator echoed like a distant metronome in the sterile, dimly lit ICU. Machines beeped in an irregular symphony, each sound a harsh reminder of how fragile the line between life and death could be. Tubes snaked around Emilia's still body, her chest rising and falling in shallow, mechanical movements. The faint hiss of the oxygen line was steady, but it offered little comfort to Lorenzo. His eyes were locked on her face. Pale. So pale. Her skin had lost the warm glow he loved so much. Her lips, once pink and full of life, were now a faint, bluish gray. His chest ached as he took a shaky step forward. His footsteps barely made a sound on the tiled floor. "Emilia," he whispered, his voice hoarse from hours of silent prayers. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her hand. It was cold. The kind of cold that didn't belong to her. Lorenzo's heart clenched, his eyes filling with tears. He curled his fingers around hers, careful not to disturb the tubes connected to her arm. "You're still here," he said softly, his breath unsteady. "I know you are. I know you can hear me, Emmy." His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Behind him, the glass doors to the ICU opened with a soft whoosh. Dr. Claudia Moretti stepped in, her eyes filled with both professionalism and quiet compassion. She pulled down her mask and approached him slowly. "Lorenzo," she said gently, her hands folded in front of her. "Can we speak for a moment?" He turned toward her, his eyes pleading for good news, his lips pressing into a thin line. He glanced back at Emilia once, then released her hand as though he were afraid to leave her. "Yeah," he croaked, rubbing his face with his hands as he followed Dr. Moretti a few feet away. Dr. Moretti took a breath before she spoke, as if preparing herself for the weight of the words she was about to say. "We've stabilized her for now, but she's not breathing on her own." Her heart is struggling to maintain a steady rhythm, so we've had to place her on ECMO. ECMO? Lorenzo repeated, his brow furrowed in confusion. Extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, she explained. It's essentially a machine that takes over the function of her heart and lungs, allowing her body to rest while we address the embolism. It's a last resort, but it's giving her a chance. Lorenzo's eyes flickered with understanding, but his face remained tense. And what are her chances? Dr. Moretti's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes heavy with honesty. It's hard to say. Every case is different, but I won't lie to you, Lorenzo. It's critical. He swallowed hard, his throat dry as sandpaper. His gaze shifted to the floor for a moment, his hands on his hips, his fingers digging into his sides. He took a breath, closed his eyes, and then opened them with renewed focus. Do everything, he said firmly. Everything you can do. Please. Dr. Moretti nodded once. We will. I promise. She glanced toward Amelia and softened her tone. Talk to her. It helps. She needs to know you're here. He nodded, his jaw tightening as he returned to his wife's bedside. Hours passed. Lorenzo didn't remember how long he had been sitting there. His hands were clasped together, his elbows resting on his knees as he stared at the floor. He had already called his family. His parents, Sofia and Matteo, were on their way from Florence. Emilia's sister, Beatrice, had been the first to answer his call. Her voice cracked with shock, but she had promised to be there as soon as possible. Now all he could do was wait. The ICU was too quiet. The beeping monitors filled the air, but it wasn't real noise. It was background noise like a ticking clock in an empty house. Lorenzo rubbed his face with both hands, his palms pressed against his eyes until he saw flashes of white light behind his lids. Come back to me, Amelia, he muttered into his hands. His voice broke, cracking like thin glass. Please, come back to me. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to see a message from Beatrice. I'm here. Where are you? He shot up from his chair, wiping his face quickly. He walked down the corridor, his steps heavy and unsteady. The moment he saw Beatrice standing at the entrance with red-rimmed eyes and a coat half off her shoulders, he felt himself break. Lorenzo, she said softly. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She walked toward him, wrapping her arms around him like she had done 100 times before when they were family, not in-laws. He buried his face in her shoulder, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Beatrice held him tightly, her fingers gripping the back of his shirt like she was holding him together. Shoo, she whispered, her voice trembling. She's strong. You know she is, Lorenzo. She's always been strong. His breath hitched as he pulled away, his eyes red but determined. She is, he agreed, his voice raw but sure. She is strong. Then we pray, Beatrice said, taking his hand and giving it a squeeze. We pray for her like she's prayed for all of us. They walked together to the small hospital chapel. It was dimly lit, with soft candlelight flickering against stained glass windows. Lorenzo stared at the rows of wooden pews, the faint smell of incense still lingering in the air. He hadn't prayed in years. He wasn't even sure he knew how. But here, with Beatrice kneeling beside him, he folded his hands, lowered his head and whispered, Please God, please. Their whispered prayers filled the stillness of the chapel. Lorenzo didn't know if God was listening. He didn't know if anyone was. But it didn't matter. It was all he could do. When his parents arrived, Sofia hugged him as if he were still her little boy, pulling him against her chest. I'm here, Figlio, she whispered, kissing his head. Matteo placed a hand on his son's back, silent but steady. No one asked for updates. They knew. Hours later, Lorenzo returned to Amelia's side. Her face was as still as it had been before, but he refused to see it as defeat. He pulled the chair close, leaning in until his face was next to hers. Amelia, he said softly, his lips close to her ear. You can hear me, I know you can. I'm right here. Beatrice is here. Mama and Papa are here too. We're all waiting for you, Bella. His hand wrapped around hers, squeezing it as he closed his eyes. His breath shook as he whispered, We need you, Amelia. I need you. Evelina needs you. The machines continued to beep steadily, their lights flickering like distant stars. His eyes squeezed shut and a tear slid down his cheek. He pressed his forehead against the side of the bed, his lips moving in a silent plea. Please, Amelia, he whispered, his voice breaking. Come back to us. His tears fell onto the blanket covering her hand. Her fingers were still cold. Too cold. He sat like that for hours, his head down, his breath ragged but steady. He whispered to her, told her about Evelina, described every little detail. He told her how strong she was, how beautiful she was, how much he loved her. "I'm not giving up on you," he said, his eyes shut tightly, his lips pressed against her fingers. "I'll stay right here. I'll stay right here until you wake up." His words filled the space like a vow, echoing in the quiet room. The machines continued to beep. The ventilator continued its steady hiss. But Lorenzo didn't move. He stayed, and he prayed. The quiet hum of machines was constant in the ICU. Beeps echoed like distant metronomes, each one marking the passage of another second of uncertainty. The ventilator hissed and sighed in rhythm, keeping Amelia breathing. Her chest rose and fell, but it wasn't her own doing. It was the machine. Her fingers lay limp on the bed, her face still as porcelain. Lorenzo sat beside her, his eyes red and swollen from sleepless nights. His fingers were tangled in hers, his thumbs stroking her skin, trying to remind her that he was there. He hadn't left her side, not even for a moment. He glanced at the monitor. Heart rate steady but faint. Oxygen level stable, but only because of the machine. His gaze returned to her face, searching for any sign, a twitch, a flutter of her eyes, anything to tell him she was still fighting. "Amelia," he whispered softly, his voice cracking from exhaustion. His head hung low, his forehead resting on their entwined hands. Please come back to me. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Evelina's waiting for you." As if on cue, the door to the ICU room opened slowly. Nurse Jacob entered, his eyes warm but thoughtful as he approached. He glanced at the machines, checking the readings with quiet efficiency. Lorenzo looked up, his face worn with the weight of hope and grief. "She's the same," he muttered, his voice hollow. "No better. No worse." Jacob nodded. He stayed quiet for a moment, staring at Amelia with a pensive look, his lips pressed together in a line. "I have an idea," Jacob said, breaking the silence. Lorenzo lifted his head, his brow furrowed with confusion. "What do you mean?" Jacob glanced at him, his eyes sharp with resolve. "Skin-to-skin contact," he said, stepping closer. "Sometimes with premature babies, we place them on their mother's chest. It helps regulate their heart rate, breathing, and temperature." He looked directly at Lorenzo. "I know Amelia isn't a newborn, but sometimes touch can do things science can't explain." Lorenzo blinked, his brain struggling to process the idea. He glanced at Amelia, so still, so fragile. His heart clenched with fear. "I don't know, Jacob. She's connected to so many machines. What if it hurts her?" "I promise you it won't hurt her," Jacob said gently. "But it might help. And right now we have to try everything." Lorenzo stared at Amelia for a long moment. His fingers gripped hers a little tighter. His breath trembled in his chest. He knew how fragile she was. But he also knew that Amelia was stronger than she looked. He nodded slowly, his voice quiet but firm. "Okay, let's do it." Jacob nodded back. "I'll get Evelina." Lorenzo paced the room while Jacob went to retrieve his daughter. His heart pounded, his thoughts tangled in a chaotic mess of hope, doubt, and fear. What if it doesn't work? What if it's too much for her? What if it works? Minutes later, the door opened again. Jacob entered, cradling Evelina in his arms. She was bundled in a soft white blanket, her tiny face peeking out, eyes closed, her small lips pursed in a sleepy pout. "She's been napping," Jacob said with a soft smile. "But I think she's ready to meet her mama." Lorenzo felt his heart swell with warmth. He moved closer, his hands hovering just above Evelina's small head. Every time he saw her, he felt it again, that tidal wave of love and protectiveness so strong it threatened to knock him over. Jacob approached the bed, his eyes serious now. "We're going to place her carefully on Amelia's chest, right over her heart. We'll keep the oxygen tubes in place, but I'll monitor everything. You'll be right here with me, okay?" "Okay," Lorenzo whispered. He reached out and brushed his fingers against Evelina's cheek. "Hey Piccola, we're going to see Mama now, okay? Be gentle with her, yeah?" Jacob carefully unwrapped Evelina from her blanket. Her tiny legs kicked in the air for a moment, and she let out a soft, startled whimper. Lorenzo's heart clenched, but Jacob moved swiftly, placing the baby on Amelia's chest, belly to belly, her tiny arms curling up beneath her chin. Her cheek pressed against Amelia's skin. Warmth. Familiarity. Jacob adjusted Evelina's position, then stepped back, his eyes flicking to the monitor. "All right. Let's see what happens." Lorenzo didn't breathe. He didn't blink. His eyes were locked on the two of them, his wife and daughter, together for the first time. For a moment nothing happened. The machine beeped steadily. The ventilator hissed. The seconds stretched into infinity. Then Evelina shifted. Her little head nudged against Emilia's collarbone, and her body curled in, her small legs drawing up. It was the most natural movement in the world. A baby finding warmth, finding home. Suddenly Lorenzo's breath caught. His eyes darted to Emilia's hand. It twitched. "Did you see that?" he gasped, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Jacob." Her hand moved. Jacob's head snapped toward Emilia's hand. "I saw it," he said, his eyes wide. "I saw it." Her fingers twitched again. Slowly, her thumb pressed against the blanket beneath her hand. The heart monitor flickered. The steady rhythm shifted slightly, the beeps coming faster, closer together. "Her heart rate just increased," Jacob said, his voice filled with awe. He rushed to the monitor, his hands hovering over the controls. "It's stronger." "Emilia?" Lorenzo whispered, leaning down next to her face. His heart pounded wildly, his breath shallow with hope. "Emilia, can you hear me?" "It's me, Lorenzo. I'm right here." "Evelina's here too." Her eyelids flickered. Lorenzo's heart stopped. He leaned closer, his hands on either side of her face. "Come on, amore. Come back to us." Her lashes fluttered again, her eyes moving beneath her lids. Her fingers shifted, curling slowly. "She's responding," Jacob said, barely able to believe it. "Her vitals are stabilizing. Heart rate steady." Lorenzo's tears came freely now, falling down his face in rivers. He pressed his forehead against hers, his breath shaky and uneven. "You're coming back, Emilia. You're coming back." Her eyes blinked slowly, like someone waking from a deep sleep. Her pupils adjusted to the light and she blinked again, slower this time. Lorenzo pulled back, his eyes wide, his breath caught in his throat. "Emilia," he whispered. "Emilia, can you see me?" Her gaze shifted slowly toward him. Her eyes, though heavy with exhaustion, focused on his face. Her lips parted and a shallow, breathless sound came out. "Oh? Oh. Lorenzo?" she croaked, her voice barely more than a breath. Lorenzo broke down, his hands covering his face as he let out a sob of pure, unfiltered relief. His body shook with it, his heart finally releasing all the weight it had carried. "I'm here," he choked out, grabbing her hand and holding it tightly. "I'm here, Emilia. I'm right here." Jacob let out a soft laugh of disbelief, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "I don't know how to explain this," he muttered, shaking his head. "But I'm not going to question it." Emilia's eyes shifted toward her chest, where Evelina lay curled against her. A slow, soft smile spread across her face. Tears gathered in her eyes as she gazed at her daughter for the first time. "Evelina," she whispered, her lips trembling with emotion. Her gaze lifted to meet Lorenzo's. "She's perfect." Lorenzo nodded, his hands cradling both of theirs. "Just like her mother." The beeping of the heart monitor played on, but this time, it wasn't frightening. It was strong. It was steady. It was the sound of life returning. The waiting room felt like a vacuum where time moved slower than anywhere else on Earth. The muted hum of overhead lights droned on, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic. Lorenzo sat in one of the hard, plastic chairs, his elbows on his knees, his phone gripped tightly in both hands. Every so often he unlocked the screen just to stare at it. No notifications. No updates. His eyes flickered to the large clock on the wall. 5 hours. 5 long, torturous hours since Dr. Moretti had taken Emilia for another round of tests. His heart hadn't stopped pounding since then. Every second that passed felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. Across from him, Beatrice sat with Evelina cradled in her arms. She rocked gently, her head tilted down, humming a soft lullaby. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it echoed through the quiet room, soothing and steady. Evelina shifted, her tiny hands peeking out of the blanket, her small fingers curling and uncurling with each shift of Beatrice's arms. "Sleep, little one," Beatrice murmured, her eyes never leaving the baby's face. "Mama's going to be just fine." Her smile was small, but her voice carried an unshakable certainty that Lorenzo envied. He watched them for a moment, his eyes filled with both love and exhaustion. His throat felt raw, as though he had spent the past few hours shouting, but he hadn't spoken much at all. Words felt too heavy to carry. He turned his attention back to his phone, his thumb tapping the edge, his mind racing with every what-if imaginable. "Lorenzo," Beatrice said softly, still rocking Evelina. Her eyes met his, clear but firm. "She's strong. You've seen it for yourself. Stop torturing yourself." He exhaled a long, shaky breath. "I know," he said, but his voice was distant, hollow. His eyes shifted to the hallway beyond the waiting room doors. Every time a nurse walked by, his eyes followed them like a shadow. She fought to come back to you, Beatrice continued, lifting Evelina higher against her chest. She's going to fight to stay. Lorenzo swallowed the knot of emotion in his throat. He closed his eyes, letting his head fall into his hands. His fingers pressed against his temples, trying to push the storm of thoughts out of his mind. Just breathe. Just breathe. Hours passed, but it could have been days for all Lorenzo knew. The ticking of the clock grew louder, more insistent. His phone buzzed a few times with messages from his mother, Sophia. Any news? One read. We're praying, said another. He didn't respond. What could he say? No news yet. Still waiting. Still drowning. His father, Matteo, had arrived not long after Beatrice. Matteo sat in the corner of the room, quiet as stone. Every so often he glanced toward Lorenzo, his face stoic but understanding. They shared looks only men who had been through war, emotional or otherwise, could understand. Jacob passed by once, giving Lorenzo a nod of silent reassurance before disappearing through the doors again. It didn't help. Not really. Time warped, stretching like elastic, pulling his patience thinner and thinner. His knee bounced restlessly and he stared at the floor, his hands clasped together in a tight ball. Every time a nurse walked by, he sat up straighter, his heart leaping into his throat. But they never stopped for him. Not until Dr. Moretti. The double doors swung open and there she was, her auburn hair tied back in a loose bun, her eyes sharp but softened with something else. Oh. Lorenzo's breath caught in his chest as he stood so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. Her eyes met his and she smiled. Lorenzo, she called out, taking off her surgical cap. I have good news. His breath hitched. His legs moved before his mind even registered what was happening. In 2 long strides, he was in front of her, his eyes wide with panic and hope in equal measure. Tell me, he said, his voice strained with desperation. Please tell me. Dr. Moretti placed a hand on his arm. Her gaze was steady, reassuring. Her heart and lungs are beginning to function on their own, she said clearly, each word like a lantern being lit in the darkness. We're seeing major signs of improvement. Her oxygen levels are stabilizing, and her heart is holding steady. Lorenzo's breath left him in a rush. It felt as if someone had pulled a cord tight around his chest, only to cut it loose in an instant. He stumbled back, his hands flying to his face as a ragged, shuddering breath escaped him. Tears poured from his eyes and he didn't bother to wipe them away. His whole body shook, his legs barely holding him up. Grazie Dio, he whispered into his hands, his voice cracking into a sob. Grazie Dio. Beatrice shot up from her chair, holding Evelina against her chest with one arm as she rushed over to him. She placed her free hand on his back, rubbing slow circles. Tears streamed down her cheeks too, though she was smiling wide. I told you, she said, pulling him into a hug so fierce it felt like she was holding him together. I told you she's strong. She always has been. He buried his face in her shoulder, his tears soaking into the fabric of her coat. His whole body felt weightless and heavy at the same time. Relief crashed over him like a tidal wave, every ounce of fear and worry spilling out at once. Dr. Moretti gave them both a moment. She glanced at Evelina, her smile growing softer. She's a fighter just like her mama. Beatrice laughed through her tears, looking down at the baby in her arms. That's right, Piccola, she cooed. Just like mama. Lorenzo pulled back, wiping his face with the sleeve of his shirt. His eyes were still wet, his breaths uneven, but he was smiling now, truly smiling for the first time in days. He turned to Dr. Moretti. Can I see her? He asked, his voice raw but hopeful. Not just yet, she said gently, tilting her head toward the hallway. We're reducing her dependency on the ECMO, and I want to be sure her vitals stay strong. But it's a good sign, Lorenzo. It's a very good sign. He nodded, his gaze flicking toward the hallway as if he could see Amelia through the walls. Okay, he said, his voice more steady now. Okay, I'll wait. And he would. He'd wait as long as it took. He glanced at Beatrice, who sat back down, rocking Evelina once more. Their eyes met and she smiled at him knowingly. See, she said softly, her voice full of love and certainty. I told you, Lorenzo. She's strong. His chest rose and fell with a steady breath, the first calm breath he'd taken in what felt like days. He sat beside Beatrice, reaching over to gently stroke Evelina's head with his thumb. Her tiny hands waved in the air, her little fingers opening and closing. Lorenzo felt a peace he hadn't felt in days. It wasn't over, but it was enough for now. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on his daughter. "We're going to be okay," he said quietly. He glanced toward the hallway where Amelia was resting, her heart beating steadily, her lungs working on their own. He exhaled slowly, his eyes closing for just a moment. The weight of fear lifted from his chest. "We're all going to be okay." For the first time since it all began, he believed it. The room was quiet, except for the steady rhythm of the heart monitor and the soft, controlled breaths of the ventilator. The curtains were drawn halfway, letting in thin rays of sunlight that painted the floor in pale stripes. The warm glow of morning light filtered through the window, illuminating the room with a soft, golden hue. Lorenzo sat slouched in a chair next to the bed, his eyes half closed but still watching her. He hadn't left Emilia's side in 2 days. The shadows beneath his eyes were darker now, his beard thicker, his body weighed down with exhaustion. But he didn't care. He wouldn't leave. Not until she woke up. Her hand lay just inches from his, pale but warm. No longer cold like before. The warmth had given him hope. For the past 2 nights, he had gripped that hand as if it were the last tether holding him to the world. "You're going to come back to me?" he had whispered countless times. "You're too stubborn to give up now, Amelia." He was half asleep when it happened. A flicker. A movement so small that, at first, he thought it was his imagination. Her fingers shifted, just barely curling inward. His eyes snapped open, fully alert. He sat up straight, his heart pounding in his chest. "Amelia?" His voice cracked and he leaned closer, searching her face. "Amore, can you hear me?" Her eyelids twitched. "What? Twice?" Then, slowly, like the first light of dawn peeking over the horizon, they opened. Her lashes fluttered, her eyes unfocused and hazy. Her breathing, once shallow and uneven, grew steadier, deeper. Lorenzo pressed his hand to his mouth, his breath stolen from his chest. His body shook, his heart thudding wildly. He blinked away the tears filling his eyes, too afraid to speak, afraid to scare her back into unconsciousness. But then her gaze shifted. Her eyes, slow and searching, found him. She blinked once, her brows knitting together in confusion. Her lips moved but no sound came out. "You're back," Lorenzo whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief and joy. His face crumpled as tears spilled down his cheeks. He laughed through his tears, gripping her hand with both of his. "You're back, Amelia. You did it." Her eyes widened as if she were still trying to understand. Her gaze scanned the room slowly before landing back on him. Her lips moved again, this time forming one broken, breathy word. "Oh? Well, Lorenzo?" His eyes squeezed shut, and he let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He lowered his head, his forehead pressing against the back of her hand. Yes, it's me," he said, his voice muffled. "It's me, Amore. I'm right here." Her breathing grew steadier. Her lips parted again and her eyes flickered with growing awareness. Her gaze searched his face, moving slowly from his eyes to his cheeks, then down to his tear-soaked beard. She blinked a few more times, her brows furrowing in confusion. "What happened?" she asked, her voice so soft it was barely a whisper. Lorenzo lifted his head, wiping his face quickly. He leaned forward, his fingers brushing her hair back from her forehead. "It's a long story, Amelia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You had us scared for a while. You had me scared." Her gaze softened and she squeezed his hand weakly, her fingers curling into his. "Sorry," she whispered, her lips tugging into the smallest, faintest smile. Lorenzo laughed, a deep, broken sound filled with disbelief and relief. He shook his head, brushing his hand down her cheek. "Don't you dare apologize," he said, his voice shaking. "You have nothing to be sorry for." Her eyes stayed on his face for a moment longer before her brows lifted, realization dawning on her. Her eyes darted around the room, searching. "Where is she?" Amelia asked, her gaze sharp now, her eyes locking on him. Where is my baby?" Lorenzo felt his throat close with emotion, his breath catching as he nodded quickly. "She's okay," he promised, his voice hoarse. "She's perfect, Amelia. She's perfect." He turned his head toward the door. "Jacob," he called out, his voice louder now, filled with urgency. "Get Beatrice. Get the baby." His words echoed down the hall and he turned back to Amelia, leaning in close, his eyes locked on hers. "You're going to meet her, Amore," he whispered, his eyes shining with love. "You're going to meet our little star." Moments later the door opened. Beatrice entered with Evelina cradled in her arms, her eyes already full of tears. She walked slowly, like she was carrying something more precious than gold. Her gaze flicked between Amelia and Lorenzo, her smile widening into something unstoppable. "She's been waiting for you," Beatrice said softly as she approached the bed. Her eyes filled with joy and relief. "We all have." Lorenzo moved to the side, giving Beatrice space. Emilia's eyes followed them both, her breath shallow with anticipation. Her lips trembled as tears welled in her eyes, spilling onto her cheeks. Beatrice leaned forward, cradling Evelina close. "Here she is," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Say hello to Mama, little one." Emilia's lips parted, her breath hitching as tears flowed freely down her cheeks. Her arms felt weak, but Lorenzo was there, guiding her hands upward as Beatrice lowered Evelina into her arms. The moment their skin touched, the world stopped. Emilia let out a broken sob, her whole body trembling as she gazed down at her baby girl. Her fingers ran along the curve of Evelina's tiny cheek, her thumb brushing against the softest skin she had ever felt. Evelina shifted, letting out a soft grunt before settling into her mother's arms. "Ciao mia piccola Stella," Emilia whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Hello, my little star." Her breath came in short, shallow gasps as if her heart couldn't keep up with the love surging through her. Her forehead leaned forward, touching Evelina's, her tears dripping onto the baby's tiny nose. Lorenzo wiped his face again, but it was useless. The tears wouldn't stop. He leaned forward, wrapping his arm around Emilia, placing a kiss on the top of her head. "She's beautiful," Emilia whispered, her eyes locked on Evelina's face as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "She's you," Lorenzo replied, his voice rough but filled with awe. "She's everything good about you." Beatrice stood nearby, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face as she watched. Even Jacob, standing quietly in the corner, rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes suspiciously shiny. The family watched in silence, too overwhelmed to speak. No words were needed. They had witnessed something sacred. Time, for once, didn't feel like it was slipping away. It felt infinite. The only sounds were the soft coos of a baby, the quiet sniffles of happy tears, and the steady, reassuring rhythm of a heart monitor that no longer frightened them. Emilia kissed Evelina's forehead and closed her eyes, her tears falling softly against her daughter's skin. "Ti ho aspettato piccola mia," she whispered. "I've been waiting for you, my little one." Lorenzo hugged them both, his arms wrapped around his entire world. "We all have," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "We all have." The sun was warm but not overbearing. The crisp spring breeze rustled the leaves of the olive trees near the entrance of St. Gabriel's Hospital. The soft scent of fresh rain lingered in the air from a morning shower, making everything feel new. Lorenzo stood just outside the entrance, his heart thrumming in his chest as he craned his neck to see through the sliding glass doors. Next to him, Elias fidgeted with the zipper of his jacket, tugging it up and down with the impatience only a 4-year-old could have. "Is she coming yet, Papa?" Elias asked, his big blue eyes flickering toward his father. "You said she was coming." "She is, champ," Lorenzo replied, squeezing Elias's small hand in his. "Be patient. Mama's on her way." "Patience is boring," Elias muttered, pouting as he kicked a pebble on the ground. Lorenzo chuckled, his gaze never leaving the doors. It had been weeks since Emilia had been admitted to the ICU. Weeks of uncertainty, fear, and hope. Now, at long last, she was coming home. His heart was a mixture of relief and disbelief. After everything they'd been through, this moment felt like a dream too good to be real. The sliding doors hissed open. His breath caught in his throat. Emilia stepped out, slow but steady, her face tilted toward the sun as if it were the first time she'd felt its warmth. Her steps were small but deliberate. Her dark hair was tied loosely behind her head, her cheeks no longer pale but flushed with a gentle pink. In her arms, wrapped in a soft yellow blanket, was Evelina. Lorenzo felt his chest tighten with emotion. His eyes blurred with tears as he watched them. His wife. His daughter. Together. Alive. "Mama?" Elias shouted, letting go of Lorenzo's hand and running forward. "Elias, wait," Lorenzo started, but Emilia was already crouching, a smile stretching wide across her face. She shifted Evelina into the crook of one arm, her other arm outstretched as Elias barreled into her. "Careful, amore," she said, laughing as she caught him in a hug. Her eyes squeezed shut as she pulled him in close, kissing his hair over and over again. "Oh mio piccolo. I missed you so much." "I missed you too, Mama." Elias's voice was muffled against her shoulder, his arms tight around her neck. "You were gone for too long." "I know," she whispered, her lips trembling. Her eyes flickered to Lorenzo, who approached slowly, his face calm but his eyes glistening. She looked at him the way a person looks at home after being away for too long. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. They stayed like that for a moment, letting their breaths sink, their eyes closed, their world quiet except for the distant sound of birds chirping. "You're home," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm home," she replied, her eyes brimming with tears. Lorenzo kissed Evelina's forehead, his lips soft against her tiny head. "Welcome home, Piccola," he whispered. He glanced at Elias, ruffling his son's curly hair. "Come on, champ. Let's go home." The Gali family home was filled with the sounds of life once more. The soft clattering of plates, the hum of conversation, and the bursts of laughter echoed through the cozy house. The dining table was full, each seat occupied by someone who had prayed for Emilia's return. Matteo and Sofia sat at the head of the table, with Beatrice across from them, her eyes crinkled with laughter as she teased Lorenzo about the state of his kitchen. "I thought you'd be a better cook after all those nights alone," Beatrice quipped, cutting into a fresh slice of lasagna. "But from what Sofia says, it was survival food at best." "Hey," Lorenzo said, holding up his hands in mock defense. "I got us through it, didn't I?" "Barely," Sofia added, winking at him as she scooped a forkful of lasagna into her mouth. "Don't worry, Mama," Elias said with absolute seriousness, his face scrunched up in concentration as he poked at his plate. "I helped Papa cook. I showed him how to make cereal." The entire table burst into laughter, and Beatrice snorted into her glass of water. Lorenzo rolled his eyes, pointing at his son. "Traitor." Emilia's laugh came soft and melodic like the sound of a bell. Lorenzo turned to her, his heart swelling in his chest. She sat at the end of the table, Evelina sleeping against her chest, her tiny hand curled into Emilia's shirt. Emilia looked at everyone, her eyes filled with warmth and gratitude. Her gaze lingered on each of them. Her sister, her in-laws, her son, her husband, and finally the small bundle in her arms. Her family. Her world. Her eyes grew misty, but she smiled anyway. She lifted her gaze to the room, her voice quiet but strong. "I'll never take a single moment for granted again," she said, her eyes full of wonder. Her hand shifted slightly, her thumb rubbing gentle circles on Evelina's back. "Not one." The table fell into silence. Not a sad silence, but a knowing one. Beatrice placed her fork down and leaned forward, nodding. "None of us will," she said softly, her eyes filled with tears she didn't bother to wipe away. Lorenzo's gaze met Emilia's from across the table. Their eyes locked, unspoken words passing between them. He reached out, his hand sliding over hers, his fingers lacing with hers. The warmth of his touch spread through her, grounding her in this moment. "None of us will," Lorenzo echoed, his voice firm with certainty. Their eyes stayed locked for a long moment, and in that silence, there was no fear, no doubt. Only love. Later that night, after everyone had left, and the house was quiet once more, Lorenzo stood at the edge of Evelina's crib. The soft glow of the nightlight bathed the room in a warm, golden light. Emilia stood beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. They both watched Evelina sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in the most peaceful rhythm imaginable. Her small fingers twitched in her sleep, her face scrunching up before she sighed and relaxed again. "She's perfect," Emilia whispered, her breath warm against his arm. Lorenzo smiled, his eyes fixed on his daughter. "She is." Silence settled over them, comfortable and still. No fear. No noise. Just the sound of their daughter's soft breathing and the warmth of Emilia by his side. "Do you ever wonder," Emilia began, her voice hesitant but thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what brought me back?" Lorenzo turned his head, his eyes searching hers. "Every day," he admitted, his brow lifting. "But I think I already know." "Yeah?" she asked, glancing up at him, her eyes curious. He tilted his head toward the crib, his gaze fixed on Evelina. "Her." Emilia followed his gaze and smiled, her lips tugging into a soft, knowing curve. She reached up, resting her palm on his cheek, tilting his head so she could look him in the eye. "Her," she repeated, leaning up to press a kiss against his lips. "And you, Lorenzo." Their foreheads pressed together, and for a moment, there was nothing else in the world. No hospitals. No machines. No fear. Only them. Their love. Their family. "I love you, Lorenzo," she whispered, her voice so quiet it was barely audible. "I love you more," he replied, his voice strong and sure. The night pressed on, but they didn't notice. The only time that mattered now was the time spent together. They stood there, arm in arm, gazing down at their daughter. She was their reminder. Their miracle. Their reason to never, ever take another moment for granted.